Hi, JR Forasteros. Thank you so much for joining us.
It is such an honor to be here. How are y'all?
We're doing great. I'm loving this fun shirt. Is this some
I
mushrooms
think
or
you.
flamingos?
Flamingos. They're flamingos. Yeah, it's,
Oh,
it's party time.
excellent. Yeah, summertime. All right. Well, today you're hoping to talk about the special rules as the beginning of a conversation. And I'm curious, both first off, if you could kind of give an overview of exactly what the special rules refers to, and then also sort of what is this conversation?
Yeah. The special, well, we don't call them the special rules anymore, right? Because we're hip and with it. I think they're called the Code of Christian Conduct now. But
Mhm.
way back in the day, in 1908, when the Church of the Nazarene was first incorporated as a denomination, and we wrote our very first manual, which I know many of us have copies of. We have it enshrined on a bookcase somewhere, right? Um, I think our denominational founders, in their wisdom, created two separate sort of statements of belief. One of them was our Articles of Faith,
Mhm.
which includes things like what we believe about God, what we believe about salvation, what we believe about end times, creation, that kind of stuff. Eh, But because we were a holiness denomination and we wanted the Holy Spirit to make a real difference in not only our individual lives, but in our world, we understood that, frankly, other than the doctrine of entire sanctification, there wasn't a lot that separated those articles of faith from a lot of other denominations. And so they created this other, and I think that's why they called it special rules, right? Special because we're special, like we're God's peculiar people, as we used to say. And those rules were the way I look at it is they were our denomination trying to work out what it means to be a holiness people in this particular time and in this particular place. So that you had things. I mean, again, this I should say I grew up Southern Baptist, so I come to the Church of the Nazarene with a zeal of a convert. I learned all of this stuff like as an outsider, trying to decide if this was a denomination I wanted to call home. So you had things like that was where it was like no dancing, no going to the circus, no going to the movies, and of course things like no alcohol and some of that other stuff. What's really interesting as you look at the manuals that are, of course, published once every 4 years after we have another General Assembly, is the Articles of Faith change very little. We get language updates here and there, but they're relatively static. They look fairly similar to what they did in 1908. The special rules, on the other hand, don't, and not just the name has changed, right? But we have, now we can dance, I guess, kind of. It still makes us nervous, but it's allowed. We can go to the movies. I think circuses are fine now or whatever. And then we've added other stuff in too, like our statement on human sexuality, like our statement on the sanctity of life. And these are responses to what's going on in the world and in our larger cultures. And again, I think some people would say like, oh, well, that's like reactive or whatever. But I actually think it's kind of this beautiful thing where our denomination tries to come together. And again, once every 4 years, say, do we really have what it means to be a holiness people right? Are we really doing this in a good way? And of course, it's caused all kinds of conversations. I'm sure everybody has probably heard about the idea of doing regional manuals, right? Because we understand that holiness probably looks different for different people in different places in the world, not just different in 2023 than it did in 1908. And so there's some real struggle, but it's all centered around what does it mean to be a holiness people? And so we have this one document, the Articles of Faith, that's relatively static. And then we have another document, the Special Rules of the Code of Christian Conduct, which was designed to be always in flux because we know culture is always changing and what holiness requires of us is always changing. And I just don't know that you can make a document like that without some kind of humility and admitting that like we're not always going to get it right. Not only is the world constantly changing and culture constantly shifting and evolving, but we're fallible and we don't always get right what it means to be holy. So when it comes to this discussion, particularly what we're all here for, right? Our statement on human sexuality is not in the Articles of Faith. It's in the Code of Christian Conduct,
Mhm.
which means we when we added it into our denomination as something that our denomination thought was important, we did not put it in the Articles of Faith, which is what has the most weight. We put it in this space where we say, well, how are we applying the Articles of Faith, right? How do we interpret these things that we believe to be true about God and the way God interacts with the world into our everyday lives? So a lot of us who are here, including myself, have gotten some heat for disagreeing very publicly and loudly with our statement on human sexuality. And a number of people have asked us, well, if you don't agree, why don't you just leave, right? Why don't you go to another denomination? Which I genuinely think is a fair question, right? I mean, and that does happen for any number of reasons where ministers decide, you know what, I'm a better fit in some other denomination somewhere else. But for me, where that disagreement should be reserved for is the Articles of Faith, right? If I maybe decide I'm not on board with the doctrine of the Trinity anymore, or if I'm really having serious doubts that Jesus is the only way to heaven, or if I just don't really believe there's any kind of second coming of any kind, whether it's pre-trib, post-trib, trib, I just, I think it's not happening at all, and this is all there ever is. Those are the times when it's probably time for me to have a serious talk with my district superintendent about turning in my credentials and going to a denomination that is going to align better on those core things. No one agrees with all of the articles of or the Code of Christian Conduct, right? I mean, I would be interested in a straw poll of how many lead pastors conduct their board meetings with Robert's Rules of Order, or how many of us have gone to a shop at a grocery store that sells alcohol, or different things like this, right? And again, it's because I just don't think that's. I don't think that's bad. I think that that's the whole point of the special rules or the Code of Christian Conduct, is they're meant to be the beginning of a conversation about what does holiness look like in this time and place, not the end of it. So when it comes to human sexuality, I say, I, as an affirming pastor, look at our Articles of Faith and I say, I think when we follow these right, you end up becoming an affirming person. You end up affirming queer folks right where they are. Which means I think our statement on human sexuality is wrong, right? But because it's in the Code of Christian Conduct, I think that means it's an invitation by our denomination, whether they mean it this way or not, for us to continue to talk about this and continue to press on this and continue to suggest that we can do a better job of being holiness people in the here and now. So.
Interesting. So you're really wanting to embrace the beginning of the conversation. I think that how we actually have that conversation is maybe a little tricky, and there's a lot of different venues. And I'm curious what you kind of see as maybe some best practices, or helpful and unhelpful, or just general thoughts on where this conversation takes place and how we ought to approach it.
Yeah, I think if I had one, which I should, I guess, go on record. I'm cis hetero. I'm like, I'm an ally at best, aspiring ally. And I think honestly, my biggest concern with the state of the conversation in our denomination right now is that it has intentionally excluded any of our queer Nazarenes from a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think anytime you're talking about people without letting them be represented, that's unjust. That could be my Americanness talking. It's the no taxation without representation thing that goes all the way back to the Boston Tea Party, right? But like, I genuinely think that when we are making decisions about people who have the Holy Spirit in their lives, who are vibrant and flourishing in their faith communities and all of that, and we're making decisions and they don't get to be a part of that conversation, we're not going to make a just decision from the outset. So,
right.
I think first and foremost, we really need to center some queer voices at the table at these conversations. Which means I'm probably happy to sit down and take a seat and sit in the back and just be like, that's fine. I'm happy to just be like a Me Too guy, or me also guy. I'm happy to be, you know what I mean? Like, I'm happy to be a person who's like a support, not the center of the conversation, because I'm the least affected by this, right? So I think that's one thing for sure. I think the other thing that we have to recognize is that people like me have a lot less at stake in the conversation. People like me are the ones that tend to want to play devil's advocate or say, just for the sake of argument. And I think we often don't realize that in doing that, we're treading on people's very identity and on some places that are very tender and vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And so I think I'm saying we, like, I'm specifically meaning like cis hetero people like me, mm-hmm. need to learn new conversational skills that because we're talking about some things that are very foundational for folks that are not us. And so in places where we don't feel like the conversation is very fraught or very tense and there's not much at stake, it might actually be very painful for some of the other folks at the table,
Right.
and I think just being able to acknowledge that and then trying to learn how to sense that and be sensitive to that and understand that probably that means the conversation isn't going the places I think it should go, or the way I think it should go, or the speed I think it should go, is okay, because it's not my conversation, right?
That's really valuable to hold in our minds. Yeah, thank you for that. So in thinking about the Code of Christian Conduct and starting this conversation, in the last a month or so, the Board of General Superintendents released this statement, basically saying the Code of Christian Conduct is equal for essential to salvation as articles of faith, which seems, pretty, it's a pretty strong statement. And I think there's a lot of backlash. I'm curious your thoughts there and exactly what the effect of that statement has on this larger conversation that you're hoping to generate.
Yeah, so I've heard, we have not had our district assembly yet. We don't have ours till July. So I have talked to other pastors who have already had their district assemblies. So they have had a chance to talk to their general superintendents about this ruling that they issued. And they have, to a person, sworn that it was not a way to trap those of us who are affirming and make it easier to take our credentials away. Because again, those of us who, and this is not me, I have not been put on trial, but a number of us who are authors in the book have faced that. And the defense that has seemed to work the best for mounting a sort of a polity defense is what I'm advocating here, right? Tom is one that has made the same argument that I have, and I think it's I mean, obviously I believe in it because I made the argument in the book, but I think it's easy for us to look at this and say, oh, they're trying to maneuver to take that, sort of, I guess, take that away from us. They swear that that's not the case, and I try to be generous and take them at their word. It's difficult for me. I'm a pretty suspicious person by nature, I guess. But I honestly think I'm also the kind of a person that says, okay, if you want to dance, let's dance, right? And just start taking all of these other things to their extremes, like, reporting pastors who don't use Robert's Rules of Order and saying, like, I think they're putting apparently we're putting our congregations at risk by not running our board meetings according to Robert's Rules of Order. That doesn't make sense to me, but we've got to follow the general church. And that's what our generals say. I saw so-and-so shopping at a Kroger, and that Kroger serves, sells beer. And so, what are we going to do about that? And just, I think the more that they can be faced with the absurdity of the position. And again, it's absurd because our founding documents never designed them to be equal, right? I mean, that's my whole argument. When you try to make them equivalent, it quits working very quickly. All of that assumes you have folks on the other side who are engaging in good faith. And again, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they're engaging in good faith. But I do think the next several months, next couple of years will tell us how much good faith we're actually seeing on the other side of this. Or if this is in fact something like what we saw when, the GOP refused to put Merrick Garland in and say, we know what the rules are. We just don't want to play by them because we want to do things our way. I mean, that could be what's happening here. I hope it's not. They say it's not. We'll have to wait and see. And again, until then, I think the best thing we can do is document everything and just be really clear. What Brene Brown's clarity is kindness, right? So if you're leaving a meeting or a conversation unsure, just ask for some clarity. If someone wants to meet with you, here's a free tip. This is something I was taught by another pastor. It's a beautiful thing. Anytime you meet with someone one-on-one, you don't have to record everything. What you can do is take notes. When you're done, email the person your notes and say, hey, here are the big takeaways I had from the meeting. Is there anything else you would add, anything I missed? And let them reply to the email. Then you have a document that if there's ever something that comes up later, you can say, well, actually here we go. Here's what we did. It's unfortunate that we're in a place where we have to think like that and have to be careful. But like I said, this is a fraught topic. We know that not everyone in our denomination is a good faith actor. And so I do think we have to be, as Jesus said, as gentle as doves, but as wise as serpents. And so, again, sad that we have to do that within our denomination, but it's also, how would I say this? Like, I don't know, for me, it's worth it,
Yeah. Yeah. So I have one final question for you, JR. Back to at the beginning, you mentioned that some people floated the idea of a regional code of conduct statement for each region. What's your opinion? Do you think this is a good idea? Do you see any potential pitfalls? What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, there's always pitfalls, right? Like, I think the regional thing lets us be a little bit more responsive. I understand that what it starts to feel like is that we're just completely different churches. But I got to be honest, if you come to my church on a Sunday morning and then go to the Nazarene church down the street, you'll probably think we're two different churches also, right? I mean, we see what we could call cultural variance even in the United States. And that's not even getting into when we talk about having, a primarily Black Nazarene church or primarily Hispanic Nazarene church or whatever, right? So I think if the reasoning is what holiness asks of us in this moment, in this place, is different, and if the code of conduct is hindering our work for the gospel rather than helping it, then that's a great reason to do regional manuals. And there's always going to be, I mean, there's no perfect solution to anything. It's going to cause weird stuff and problems, and I can't even begin to imagine what all of those are, because I'm just not very good at Nazarene polity stuff. I'm still too Southern Baptist, I think, in my roots. But I think, again, if the impulse is the same thing that our original founders were asking, what does holiness require of us here and now? And that's why we're doing these things. Then that's good, because the last thing I want is another part of the manual that makes it harder for me to share the good news about Jesus, which is frankly what our statement on human sexuality does. I know for many of us who are gathered here, that's why we're here. It makes it difficult for us to be proud to be Nazarene when it comes to our queer friends, and I know that's why a lot of us even showed up tonight. So if we can do things that keep our manual from doing that, and they become helpful to us sharing the gospel instead of barriers or harmful, then whatever. I'm like, okay, I'm like all for that. I'm like Paul, right? All things to all people, all manuals for all, whatever, like it should be about taking the good news to the world. So
right. Yeah, excellent. I think I really like your phrase, what does holiness require of us? How can we what does holiness look like in this instance? I think that's really a good sort of hermeneutic to carry forward into these individual contexts. Thank you so much, JR. I really appreciate your time.
It was my pleasure. I'm so proud to be a part of this event. Love y'all. And hi to everyone, by the way. I didn't even say that.
I think one of the issues that JR is bringing up when we talk about the regional situation is it's already happening in the denomination. It may not be official, but I know that when I go to Europe, my Nazarene pastor friends, they're drinking beer and nobody's getting mad at them. There's this sort of, that's just the way things are there. And to my knowledge, no one's ever been taking their credentials away because they drink alcohol, because it's a European kind of thing. If you're in Germany, you drink beer. And the same is true with certain things in Africa. I remember when I was teaching at African Nazarene University, they kept asking me the polygamy question. Should someone, a man who has multiple wives, be allowed to be in the denomination? And it seemed to me like the consequences for getting rid of a wife were so negative for the woman that polygamy may not be the best option, but in that culture, it was better than some of the alternatives. So, and the Church of Nazarene seemed to function as if that was going to be, they were at least going to turn a blind eye in some cases. So it seems like de facto, we already have a regional kind of Christian code of conduct in place. And so what JR is suggesting seems to already fit.
Right. What you're saying is really making me think of a lot of sort of pushback that I might imagine to this. This is that, it's cultural relativism, it's slippery slope, which I think is something that you and I have thought a lot about in this sort of context of, well, if it's okay for pastors to drink beer, then obviously X, Y, and Z. You know, I think this is the really classic, really awful homophobic statement of, okay, well, if we become fully queer affirming, next thing you know, we're going to be marrying our pets. You know, I heard that when I was a child growing up, kind of spewed from other
Not
kids.
from me.
Yes, let me clarify. And I think that to sort of turn into our thought process in organizing this book, we really tried to not nail down, not define exactly what it means to be affirming, in order to resist the temptation to set up that sort of slippery slope response, that instead of kind of trying to decide exactly how far is too far and far enough, instead we wanted to really have a Big Ten approach of wherever you are, if you are affirming, then you are a part of this conversation.